What if a single decision, made in the dead of night by an exhausted young king, could have altered the fate of an entire kingdom? What if the war for the North turned not on a battlefield, but on a piece of parchment sealed by candlelight in a river-fed hall? Consider the young man lying awake in the darkness of River Run, and the terrible arithmetic that keeps sleep from his eyes. Robb Stark does not move. He lies upon his cot with his arms crossed over his chest, like a corpse laid out for burial, and he stares at the canvas above him as though the answers he seeks might be woven into its threads. The camp beyond his tent has gone quiet. The fires have burned low. Somewhere a horse stamps against the cold, and somewhere else a sentry paces, and beneath it all runs the endless murmur of the two rivers meeting, the Tumblestone and the Red Fork, joining and flowing on as they have for 10,000 years, indifferent to the ambitions of kings. He has counted his losses too many times to sleep. The Karstarks are gone. He struck the head from Lord Rickard's shoulders with his own sword, in accordance with the law, in accordance with justice, and in that same stroke he cut away half his cavalry. They rode into the darkness and did not return. He tells himself the man was a murderer. He tells himself it was necessary. But necessity, he has learned, does not fill the empty places in an army, and it does not soften the eyes of the lords who once looked upon him as something more than mortal. And then there is the girl, Jane Westerling, gentle and kind and utterly ruinous, sleeping now in some distant chamber, while the marriage he swore to another house festers like a wound that will not close. The Freys. He had promised them a bride, and he had taken another, and in doing so, he had traded the loyalty of the most numerous house in the Riverlands for a single night of honor. He does the mathematics again in the dark. 2,000 swords, perhaps more, the bridge at the Twins, the road home. He cannot cross the Green Fork without them. He cannot win without them. He does not finish the thought. He does not need to. When his mother comes to sit beside him, he speaks the fear aloud, and it costs him something to do so. If he dies, he tells her, and dies without a son, the North will shatter like ice beneath a spring thaw. The lords will look about them and find no Stark to follow, and they will turn upon one another, and everything his father built and everything his father died for will dissolve into the mud. Catelyn takes his hand and tells him he will not die. He looks at her the way a man looks at someone offering comfort he cannot afford to believe. By morning, the seed has taken root, and he sends for Maester Vyman. The old man comes with ink-stained fingers and cautious eyes, and Robb asks him the question that no king wishes to ask. He asks about legitimization. He asks about the naming of heirs, and the Maester tells him what the law permits and what it forbids. Only the Iron Throne, he explains, may lift the stain of bastardy from a man's name and grant him the surname of his father in full truth. That power belongs to the crown that sits in King's Landing, and that crown does not belong to Robb Stark. But there is another path, quieter and older. A king may name his heir by decree. He may set his choice down in writing, witnessed and sealed before his assembled lords, and by that act bind them to acknowledge the succession he has chosen. It is not the same as legitimacy, but in the absence of legitimacy, it is a great deal. Robb turns the possibilities over in his mind like stones in a stream. Sansa, held captive in the Red Keep, perhaps by now wedded to some Lannister who would use her claim as a leash upon the North. Bran and Rickon, believed dead beneath the ruins of a burned castle. Arya, vanished into the wide and lawless world with no word of her fate in a year. And Jon Snow, of pure Stark blood on his father's side, raised at Winterfell, loved by the small folk and the Northmen alike, a man grown who has already commanded and been obeyed, sworn to the wall by a vow that a royal pardon might one day undo. When he speaks the name to his mother, the room grows cold. Catelyn's face hardens into something he has rarely seen. She tells him no. She tells him of the shame she carried for 17 years, of the boy she could not love, of the insult his elevation would carry to every true-born child she bore. Her voice trembles with an old and buried grief. But Robb does not yield. He answers her point for point, cold as a general surveying a field. Bran and Rickon are dead. Sansa is a Lannister prisoner. Arya is lost. Only Jon carries the blood. Only Jon holds the love of the North. Only Jon commands men and has sworn a vow that can be unmade. And Catelyn, who has never lacked for words, finds that she has none. The great hall of Riverrun has held many councils, but none quite like this. What if a king, cornered by betrayal and grief, chose not to gamble on the future, but to fortify it against his own death? This is the question Robb Stark carries into the chamber where his remaining lords gather, and it is a question he intends to answer before the night has fully closed around the tumblestone. They come one by one, the men who still ride beneath the direwolf banner. The Blackfish, lean and weathered as old leather, takes his place near the high table with the wariness of a man who has counted every enemy at every gate. The Great Jon fills the room with his bulk and his voice, a mountain of a man who has followed this boy king since first he called him so. Meg Mormont, iron-haired and iron-eyed, stands with the patience of a woman who has buried husbands and raised warriors. Galbart Glover, quieter, watchful, measures the mood of the hall as one might measure the depth of a river before crossing it. The talk turns first to the Freys, as all talk must these days. The broken betrothal sits between them like a corpse no one wishes to name aloud. Old Walder Frey does not forgive. Old Walder Frey does not forget. And the alliance that carried the young wolf across the Green Fork now hangs by a thread that fraying pride grows thinner by the day. There are murmurs of reconciliation, of a wedding to mend what a wedding broke, of the price that must be paid to keep the crossing loyal. Robb listens. He does not interrupt. He lets the words settle and cool, and only when the debate has spent itself does he rise. What he says silences them all. He speaks of the war, of the roads north closed to him, of the certainty that a man who wages battle after battle will one day meet the field he cannot leave. He speaks plainly, as a soldier speaks, of the possibility of his own death. And then he speaks of the future, of a North left without a Stark to hold Winterfell, of a crown with no head to rest upon, of chaos poured into the very land they bled to free. A kingdom, he tells them, is not merely won. It is inherited. It is carried forward by blood and by law, and by the will of men to defend both. Then he produces the parchment. It is sealed with gray wax and pressed with the direwolf sigil, and every eye in the hall follows it as it passes into the light. Robb reads it aloud in a voice that does not waver. Should he die without issue of his own body, the crown of the North and the seat of Winterfell shall pass to Jon Snow, his brother, born of Eddard Stark, raised beneath the same roof, loved by the same people. For a heartbeat, no one breathes. Then the Great Jon laughs, a great booming thunderclap of approval, and slams his fist upon the table until the cups leap. He remembers the boy, he says. He remembers the quiet lad at the far end of the feasting hall, the one who bested men twice his years in the yard. Stark blood is Stark blood, he roars, and any man who says otherwise may say it to his axe. His mirth breaks the spell, but not every face shares it. The doubts come, careful and pointed. Jon is sworn to the watch, one lord notes, bound by a vow that takes no lands and holds no crowns. Will the Black Brothers surrender him? And even if they do, will the Iron Throne, that gilded chair now warmed by Lannister gold, ever bend to acknowledge a bastard raised to a kingdom? These are not idle questions. These are the walls a decree must climb. Robb answers them as a general surveying his ground. A crown, he says, is only as strong as the men willing to lift swords for it. The Iron Throne did not make him king. The North made him king, by acclamation in this very region, by the will of lords who knelt and named him so. If the North accepts Jon Snow, then no southern king can truly deny him, for denial, without the power to enforce it, is merely words on wind. The vow to the Watch may be undone by royal pardon, and pardons, he reminds them, are within a king's gift. It is the Blackfish who speaks the counsel that matters most. A decree, he says, is only as good as its delivery. This parchment must travel north by a hand that cannot be bought or broken, and it must be confirmed by the Lord Commander himself before its ink holds any weight. A letter intercepted is a letter that never was. Robb nods, for he has already thought it through. He turns to Magie Mormont and Galbart Glover. He does not send them toward the twins, toward Walder Frey's crossing and the road that whispers of ambush. He sends them west and north, toward the Neck, toward the drowned green fastness of Greywater Watch and the Crannog men who answer to House Reed. From there, hidden among the reeds and the mists, the decree will find its slow and secret way to the wall. The two lords bow. The parchment is wrapped, sealed again, sewn into oilcloth against the rain, and as they turn toward the door, the Blackfish watches them go, with the eyes of a man who cannot yet decide whether he has witnessed the saving of a kingdom or the opening move of some longer, darker game. What if a broken vow could be mended, not with an apology, but with a wedding? What if the sin of one Stark could be paid down in the coin of another man's marriage bed? This is the arithmetic of the Riverlands now, and it arrives at River Run in the shape of two Frey envoys, mud-spattered and sour-mouthed, bearing the grievances of an old man who has counted every insult ever done to him and forgotten none. They come with a list. That is the way of House Frey. For pride that has been wounded keeps its wounds in ledgers. Lord Walder, they announce, had been promised a king for a good son, a marriage sworn upon the honor of House Stark, and that promise had been cast aside for a southern girl of no consequence. The late Lord Frey, they remind the hall, had held the only crossing of the Green Fork when the young wolf needed it most, and this is how his loyalty is repaid. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing, because I upload new stories every single day. Now let's continue with the story. Robb Stark listens, and here is the difference in him now, the change that the previous night's reckoning has carved into his young face. He does not bristle. He does not reach for the easy defense of a king who can do no wrong. He knows the shape of his own guilt too well for that. The vow was his to keep, and he broke it. and no crown upon his brow can unmake the breaking. So he offers amends, not empty words, but flesh and title. His uncle Edmure Tully, Lord of Riverrun, unwed and of marriageable years, will take a daughter of House Frey to wife. It is a generous offer. It is more than generous. It binds the great house of the Riverlands to the Crossing Lords in blood, and it dresses Walder Frey's grandchildren in Tully colors. But the Blackfish does not trust generosity to satisfy a man who feeds on grievance. Sir Brynden Tully has soldiered too long, watched too many proud men, nursed too many quiet resentments, to believe that a wedding alone will close this wound. He leans close to his king and speaks low. Walder Frey, he says, will want the wedding at the Twins. He will want the Starks and the Tullys to come to him, to his hall, to his bridge, to bow their heads beneath his roof, and drink his wine, and eat his bread. And a man who wants that badly should not be given it. The condition is set then, and set hard. The wedding will happen, but it will happen at Riverrun, beneath Tully banners, behind Tully walls, guarded by Tully swords. The Freys may bring their daughter and their retinue, and they will be honored guests, but they will be guests, not hosts. The killing ground, if there is to be one, will not be of Walder Frey's choosing. The envoys receive this with faces carefully blank. They bow. They ride north again with the offer and its conditions sewn into their saddlebags, and they carry with them, though they do not know it, the collapse of a scheme that had not yet fully formed. For at the Twins, when the answer comes, Lord Walder Frey does not rage aloud. He sits in his high seat, small and shriveled and older than sin, and he turns the insult over in his mind. A wedding at Riverrun, his blood married into the Tullys under Tully protection, on Tully ground, where his men are outnumbered and surrounded and helpless. He understands what has been denied him, the trap he had begun to imagine, the closed doors and the drawn bows, and the harp that plays the song of a debt repaid, requires the Twins. It requires his walls. It requires the enemy to come to him, and the enemy will not come. That night, letters burn in a brazier that should have held only warmth. Fresh parchment is drawn out. Ink is mixed. The old man's hand, spotted and trembling, writes again to Casterly Rock, writes again to the Dreadfort, and the words he sends are the words of a conspiracy forced to improvise. Rose Bolton reads his copy in a cold northern room and does not smile, for Roose Bolton has always understood that a plan requiring the isolation of a king is only as strong as the king's willingness to be isolated. Tywin Lannister reads his and thinks the same. A young wolf surrounded by loyal swords, unwilling to divide his host, unwilling to walk into any hall not his own, is a wolf that must be hunted in the open, and the open is where wolves are strongest. Robb feels it before he can name it. The Blackfish's instincts have become, in these tense days, a kind of second sense he has learned to heed. He refuses to split his forces. He refuses to travel to Frey lands for any purpose. Instead, he looks north, past the neck, to the ancient causeway strongpoint that the Ironborn have wrested from his family. Moat Cailin, the gate to the north, held by his enemies, blocking his path home. He will march for it, through friendly Tully country, through the drowned Crenogman fens where House Reed keeps its silent watch, toward the fortress that guards his homeland's door. He will deny Roose Bolton the loneliness he needs. He will move, and in moving, become impossible to trap. The maps come out. The blackfish traces the route with one weathered finger and stops. The neck is not a place that armies conquer. It is a place that armies survive or fail to. The blackfish's finger rests on that narrow throat of the continent, where the earth turns to water and the water turns to something that is neither, and he knows what every commander before him has known. Roads are few, the causeway is one, and a host strung out along a single raised path, hemmed on both sides by black bog and reed and rotting cypress, is a host that cannot deploy, cannot flank, cannot flee. It is a host that can only be picked apart. The question is, who does the picking? Consider the arithmetic of the swamp. A great southern army marching north sees only mud and misery and the slow leaching of men to fever and sinking ground. But Robb Stark does not march into hostile country. He marches into the country of Howland Reed, and that changes every calculation on the map. They come out of the water the way they always have, silent, small, half-glimpsed in the gray light before dawn, a shape that might be a man and might be a stump, and by the time the eye has decided, the shape is gone, and a Bolton outrider is floating face down in the fen with a green arrow between his shoulders. The Crannog men do not fight the way Robb was taught to fight. They fight the way water fights, by yielding and closing, by drowning what does not belong. And what does not belong, in these days, are the pale scouts of the Dreadfort, sent creeping south to number the king's strength and find the seams in his marching column. There are no seams. Howland Reed sees to that. Robb meets him on the third night, in a low hall built on stilts above the black water, and the meeting is not what the young king expected. He had imagined a warrior. What he finds is a small, quiet man with sad eyes, a man who speaks rarely and watches always, a man who fought beside Eddard Stark at the Tower of Joy and carried whatever passed there sealed inside him for 18 years. Reed says little of the past. He does not need to. When he looks at Robb, he sees Ned, and something in that recognition does the work that 1,000 oaths could not. Old loyalties do not die in the North. They only sleep. And House Reed's loyalty, dormant since Robert's rebellion, wakes now with the tread of Stark banners across the causeway. Meanwhile, to the east, Roose Bolton is doing his own arithmetic and finding the sums have gone wrong. Here is a man who has spent an entire campaign waiting for the moment when the boy king would stand alone, when a single blade or a single betrayal might end the war and leave Roose Bolton the greatest lord in a broken North. He had a plan. He always has a plan. But plans require the enemy to cooperate, and Robb Stark is no longer cooperating. The wolf will not be separated from the pack. He moves surrounded by Karstarks and Umbers and Tully riders, and now, impossibly, by Crannog men who could cut Bolton's own outriders from the world without a sound. There is no gap to exploit. There is no lonely road to arrange. Bolton reads the board and understands, with the cold clarity that has kept him alive for 50 years, that the moment has passed. So he hedges. He does what men like Roose Bolton always do when the decisive stroke slips away. He writes to Tywin Lannister, and the letter says everything and nothing. Assurances vague as fog, regrets carefully worded, a promise to act when the time is right, and a silence about when that time might be. He will not commit his treason until he knows it will succeed. He will wait, still, to see whether the young wolf's cause collapses beneath its own weight. And if it does not, he will have committed to nothing at all. The letter burns in his hand a moment before he seals it, testing the words against the flame of his own caution. Then he sends it. It says less than it seems to. He means it to. Word travels north as the host travels north, and one piece of it strikes Robb like a lance through the ribs. Bran and Rickon. Dead, the report says. Slain at Winterfell by Theon Greyjoy, the ward his father raised, the boy Robb once called brother. 2 small heads on the walls of his own home. He does not weep where men can see him. He goes instead to the fire, where the great Jon sits, and he speaks in a voice gone very quiet. He speaks of Jon, of a bastard brother with more honor in him than most true-born lords Robb has ever met, of a boy who took the black to protect a birthright he could never claim. If the Iron Throne will not grant mercy to his sisters, Robb says, then he will grant this much to the north. Winterfell will not pass out of Stark blood. Jon will have it. The great Jon studies the fire a long moment, and then he nods, slow as a mountain moving. A snow for a Stark, he rumbles. The north will follow it, if you make it so. Robb looks into the flames. He is already making it so. What if a piece of parchment could travel faster than an army, and yet arrive too late to matter, and too soon to be understood? This is the paradox that rides north with Mage Mormont and Galbart Glover, 2 hardened bearers of a king's will, carrying a sealed decree through the cold that thickens with every league they cross. The land empties as they climb. Villages give way to holdfasts to lonely towers, and at the edge of the world the wall rises before them, a wound of ice 700 feet high, stretching east and west until the eye surrenders. They do not speak much on the final approach. There is nothing to say that the wall has not already said. Consider the calculation Robb Stark has made from a warm camp in the Riverlands. He has weighed his blood against his enemies and found his succession wanting, and so he has reached for the one Stark left standing, who cannot be touched by lords or crowns or the schemes of southern courts. A brother behind a wall of ice. Safe, Robb thinks, untouchable. He does not know what the wall has become. He does not know that his chosen heir has ridden back through the gate half dead, trailing questions no man there can answer cleanly. Castle Black is not a fortress preparing to receive a royal message. It is a wound trying to close. The great ranging has come home broken, and the men who limped back speak of the fist of the first men, of the dead rising in the snow, of a Lord Commander gone north with hundreds and returning as a rumor. Into this reeling place, the 2 envoys arrive with their parchment and their purpose, and they find the acting command distracted, exhausted, suspicious of everything that moves. Here is the first move on the board they did not anticipate. They came to elevate a man. They find him under a cloud. Jon Snow stands accused. He rode with the wildlings, ate their bread, shared their fire, and some among the Black brothers whisper that he shared more than that. He returned with an arrow's memory in his leg and a warning on his tongue, and warnings from a suspected oathbreaker carry a strange and dangerous weight. There is a girl he does not name aloud, Ygritte. The absence of her sits in him like a stone he cannot set down. But he has no time for grief, because Mance Rayder is coming, the king beyond the wall, and behind him a host greater than any lord of the 7 kingdoms has ever mustered against another. Jon knows this the way a man knows the direction of a coming storm. He has stood inside the storm. He has watched it gather. When Mage Mormont breaks the seal before him, When the words are read aloud in the cold hall, watch the terrible arithmetic pass behind Jon Snow's eyes. Heir to Winterfell, named in the line of succession to the king in the north. Everything the bastard boy once wept for, laid before him now on a page bearing his brother's wax and his brother's love. Robb has given him the one gift he never dared to want, and Jon must refuse it. Not the honor, the leaving. He does not phrase it as refusal at first. He phrases it as fact. The wildlings are coming. The dead are coming. The wall stands with too few men to hold it, and if it falls, there will be no north left for any Stark to inherit, true-born or bastard, crowned or forgotten. What is a crown against the long night? What is Winterfell if the things beyond the wall reach it? He speaks these things quietly, and the quiet is worse than shouting. He tells them that the realm of men matters more than any single name in it, and that his vows were sworn to the realm, not to his own advancement. He will not forsake his post on the eve of an assault. He will not. Meg Mormont has known many men who claimed honor as a decoration. She recognizes the other kind when she sees it, the kind worn to the bone. She watches this wounded young man refuse a kingdom's promise because a wall of ice needs defending, and something in her old warrior's heart shifts and settles. She does not argue with him. She measures him instead, the way she would measure a blade before battle, and finds the steel true. So she makes her own move, one Robb did not command but would understand. She will stay. Her spears will stay. Bear Island's daughters will bleed on the wall beside the Black brothers if the wall demands it. And the word she sends south will carry the shape of Jon's answer. He accepts the succession only as a contingency, a shadow heir, a name held in reserve against the day Robb Stark falls, and not before. Winterfell will wait. The crown will wait. The dead will not. When the veterans of the Watch hear how the bastard chose the wall over a kingdom, the suspicion in their eyes begins, slowly, to change into something else. Not yet trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The parchment lies open on the table, its purpose altered, and beyond the ice the horns have not yet sounded, though every man there knows, with cold certainty, that soon they will. What if a wall could remember every man who ever failed to hold it? What if the ice itself kept some ledger of the desperate, the outnumbered, the doomed, and waited to see whether this time the tally would come out differently? The horns sound at last in the deep hour before dawn, 3 long blasts rolling across the frozen dark, and Jon Snow is already awake to hear them. He has been awake for hours. He knew they would come. He walks the top of the wall in the gray light, with the wind cutting at him, and he does not see a hopeless line of old men and boys. He sees the thing arranged. The scythe hangs ready at the northern edge, a great blade of iron, and chains slung on its pulleys, waiting to sweep the ice clean of any who dare the climb. The barrels of oil sit warming over coals, and behind him, along the parapet and in the courtyard below, stand faces that have no business at the end of the world. The spears of Bear Island in their boiled leather, grim women and grimmer men who followed Mage Mormont north because a king asked it, and the Cranogmen of the Neck, small silent hunters with their bows and their poisoned arrows, men who move like shadows and shoot like death itself. Mance Rayder throws everything at the gate first. This is what a lesser commander would expect. This is what the veterans of another history braced for and nearly broke against. But Jon has lived among the free folk. He knows how Mance thinks, knows that the assault on the tunnel is meant to draw the defenders down and thin the men atop the ice. So he does not thin them. He holds his line and lets the Crannog men do their work from the murder holes, their arrows finding gaps in the wildling shields with a patience that borders on cruelty. And when the mammoths come lumbering out of the tree line with giants at their flanks, he does not panic. He has already decided what the sortie will do. Watch him now. See the way command settles onto him like a cloak that was always cut to his shoulders. He does not shout for the sake of shouting. He gives orders in a low, clear voice, and men obey because the orders make sense, because each command is the next logical piece in a design they can feel taking shape around them, even as the arrows fall. The oil goes over the gate at his word, and the screams below are terrible, and he does not flinch from the terror, because flinching would cost lives. The scythe sweeps once, twice, and the climbers fall away into the dark, in tangles of rope and broken bodies. And when the giants press too close, he leads the sortie himself, a hard, fast strike from the sally port that hamstrings a mammoth and sends it maddened back through Mance's own ranks, sowing chaos where there had been momentum. The Black brothers watch the bastard fight. They watch him bleed and hold, and never once give a step he does not mean to give. And the something that began as suspicion, the thing that was only the faintest beginning of trust, hardens now into loyalty, forged in the only fire the watch respects. He is one of them, more than one of them. He is the man holding the line. The first waves break, not cleanly. Nothing at the wall is ever clean, but they break, and Mance draws back to regroup, and for a moment the defenders dare to breathe. It is in that moment, with the eastern sky just beginning to pale, that the horns sound again, different horns, southern horns. And out of the tree line to the east comes not more wildlings, but ordered ranks of armored men beneath a burning heart on a golden field, cavalry sweeping in from the flank where the free folk are weakest, and the king beyond the wall discovers too late that another king has come to the end of the world. Stannis Baratheon shatters Mance's host against the wall like a wave against stone. The free folk, caught between the ice above and the iron behind, do the only thing they can. They break and scatter, and their king is dragged from the wreckage of his army in chains before the sun has fully risen. But it is not the victory that changes the game. It is what Stannis learns after it, when his stern gaze sweeps Castle Black and settles on the young man who organized its impossible defense. He is told a thing that makes him very still. There is a Stark at the wall, not a bastard any longer, but a legitimized son, named by decree, an heir held in reserve to the king in the north. Stannis Baratheon, who has come north with a claim to a throne and precious few friends to press it, hears this and begins at once to calculate. A boy who commands the Watch's love, a name that binds the north, a living key to the very kingdom he needs. He does not smile, he rarely does, but something moves behind his hard blue eyes, and he turns to his advisor and speaks 4 quiet words that will decide much of what follows. "Bring the boy to me." And Jon Snow, still wearing the blood of the assault, is told the king would see him alone. What if a king could offer a man the very thing he had dreamed of all his life, and that man could look him in the eye and refuse it? This is the question that hangs in the cold stone chamber of Castle Black, as Jon Snow stands before Stannis Baratheon, and the answer will shape the fate of 2 kingdoms. The room is spare. A brazier burns low. Stannis does not sit, And so Jon does not sit, and the two of them stand across a rough wooden table like adversaries who have not yet decided whether they are adversaries at all. The king studies the young man before him. He sees the blood dried at the collar. He sees the exhaustion that has not yet reached the eyes, and he sees, beneath it, the thing he has come to bargain for, the calm authority of someone others follow without being commanded. Stannis wastes no words. He never does. Words, to Stannis Baratheon, are coin, and he spends them like a miser. He tells Jon what he intends to give: legitimacy, a name, not Snow but Stark, not bastard but lord. Winterfell itself, the ancient seat of the kings of winter, to be raised from its ashes and placed in the hands of the last son who can rightly claim it. All of this offered freely by a king with the power to grant it, and in return, one thing only: fealty, a bent knee, a sworn sword. It is a magnificent offer. Jon feels the weight of it settle over him like a cloak of lead and gold both. Winterfell. The word alone opens a wound in him that has never fully closed. The gray walls, the warmth of the hot springs beneath the ground, the heart tree with its weeping red face. Everything he was told he could never have, laid before him now by a man with a crown. And Jon says no. He does not say it quickly. He goes first to the old man, to Maester Aemon, blind and ancient in his chair, and he pours the whole of it out, the offer and the temptation and the fear. And Aemon, who has himself refused a throne, who has spent 100 years learning what it costs a man to keep his vows and what it costs him to break them, listens in silence. Then he speaks. He tells Jon that the hardest choices are precisely the ones that ask us to surrender what we most desire. He does not tell Jon what to do. He only reminds him what he is. So Jon returns to the king, and he refuses. And he refuses with reasons, which is a thing Stannis had not expected. The first reason is the vow. Jon has spoken the words before the heart trees. He has pledged his life to the Watch, and the Watch takes no part in the wars of the realm. To accept Winterfell is to forswear himself, and a man who breaks the oldest oath he ever swore will break others when it suits him. Stannis, who values duty above all things, hears this and cannot argue against it without arguing against himself. But the second reason is sharper, and it is the reason that changes everything. Jon tells the king that he cannot take Winterfell from Stannis's hand, because Winterfell is not Stannis's to give. His brother lives. Robb Stark, king in the north, has already named Jon his heir by royal decree. The legitimization the king offers has already been done. The gift he holds out has already been given. And here the two claims collide. Two kings, each believing himself the source of the same act, each reaching for the same young man as the anchor of the same north. And Jon presses further, because he sees now the shape of the board. The North, he tells Stannis, will never rally to a Stark who has knelt to a Southern king. Whatever legitimacy Stannis grants, he grants it as a foreign claimant, and the lords of the North have not fought and bled to trade one distant crown for another. A Stark who bends the knee is no longer a Stark to them. He is a Baratheon's puppet wearing a wolf's cloak. Stannis needs the North, Jon says. He needs it far more than the North needs Stannis. The truth of it lands in the cold air between them and does not move. Stannis is silent a long moment. Then something shifts in the hard blue eyes. Not warmth, never warmth, but respect. grudging, and iron. Here is a boy who could have taken everything and chose instead to speak the truth that cost him. Here is a man Stannis can use, precisely because he cannot be bought. So the king changes the game. He does not withdraw. He proposes. He will march south from the wall and turn his host against the Ironborn who ravage the northern coast, and the Boltons who plot in the shadows. He will relieve the north of its enemies, and in return, when the wolves are safe again, Robb Stark will consider recognizing Stannis' kingship in the lands below the neck. An alliance, not submission. And Jon Snow, still wearing the blood of the assault, hears the offer and understands that it must be carried south, that he must be the one to carry it, that he has just become the single thread binding wolf to stag. He nods slowly. He tells the king he will bring it to his brother, and already, in the cold, he is thinking of the long road to River Run, and of what he will say when he reaches it. Far to the south, where the king's road narrows into the drowned country of the Neck, another wolf is already moving. Robb Stark rides at the head of a host thinned by war and swollen by resolve, and before him rises the ruin that has choked the throat of the north for 1,000 years. Moat Cailin, 3 towers still standing where 20 once stood, black against a gray sky, girdled by bog and reed and the slow rot of centuries. The Ironborn hold it now, a garrison left behind by Victarion Greyjoy's captains, men who believe the marsh itself is their sworn ally. And in a sense, they are right, for no army in the memory of Westeros has taken Moat Cailin from the south by force. The causeway is a single narrow tongue of solid ground, and every step along it can be raked with arrows from the towers until the road becomes a slaughter pen and the water runs thick. Robb knows this. He has always known this, and so he does not send his men up the causeway. Consider the problem as he considers it, sitting his horse in the last dry copse before the ground gives way to mire. A frontal assault would cost him hundreds, perhaps thousands, to buy him a broken fortress not worth the corpses. He cannot afford it. He has never been able to afford it. But the equation changes when a new variable enters the field, and that variable is a small, mud-slicked man with green in his eyes and a frog spear across his back. Howland Reed's people know the Neck the way a man knows the inside of his own skull. They know the hidden paths, the false bottoms, the game trails that thread through the bog where no boot has any business finding purchase. The crannogmen do not march, they appear. And so, while the Ironborn watch the causeway for the charge that never comes, the marsh itself begins to bleed men into the shadow of the towers. It is not a battle, it is a settling of accounts. By the gray light of the second morning, the last tower has fallen, and the road into the north lies open for the first time since the war began. Robb rides through the gate over the bodies of men who never saw the blades that took them, and he does not gloat, because gloating is for men who did not understand how close the alternative came. He understands. He always understands. The north is reopened. The Greyjoy hand upon the neck is severed at the wrist, and into this small, hard-won victory, a raven descends, black wings against a bruised sky, and everything Robb thought he knew about the shape of his war is about to shift beneath him. He reads the letter in the roofless ruin of the great hall, wind moving through the broken stones. He reads it twice, then a third time, because the words do not seem to obey the laws of the world he has been living in. Jon held Castle Black. Jon, his brother, his heir, stood upon the ice against a host of wildlings numbering in the tens of thousands, and did not break. And then Stannis Baratheon, the last true stag, landed at the wall and shattered Mance Rayder's army against the anvil of the Black Brothers' defiance. And Stannis, this grim and unbending king, this man who counts loyalty in coin no gold can mint, seeks alliance. Through Jon, always through Jon. Robb lowers the letter. His hand does not tighten on it. He is past the age of crushing paper in his fist. Instead, he stands very still, and behind those tully blue eyes, the board rearranges itself, piece by piece, and for the first time, he sees something he has not permitted himself to see since the day they crowned him in Riverrun. He sees a way to win, not survive, not endure, not fight until the last loyal sword breaks in his hand and the Lannisters bury him in a shallow grave beside his father. Win, because he has been thinking as a lone king thinks, a wolf hunting alone in a forest full of lions and krakens, and lone wolves die. But a king who is part of something larger, a king with a brother holding the far north, a stag turning his host against the Ironborn and the treacherous Boltons, a coalition binding wolf to stag against lion. That king plays a different game entirely. The war he could not win alone becomes a war he need not fight alone. So Robb Stark makes his decisions, and he makes them the way he takes fortresses, quietly, precisely, with the outcome already mapped. He calls for pen and parchment. He writes to the wall. He reaffirms, in his own hand, that Jon Snow is his named heir, legitimized by royal decree, blood of the wolf and blood of the north. He writes that Jon must come south the moment the wall is secure. And then he writes the harder thing, the thing his younger self would never have dared. He opens formal negotiation with Stannis Baratheon, and he names Jon as the thread through which stag and wolf will speak. He seals the letter. He watches the raven take it into the wind, and already he is thinking of the long road ahead, of Riverrun and the twins, and the crossing he must yet make, and of the brother even now setting out to meet him. Far to the east, in a castle of gray stone that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it, a man sits with a ledger open before him and calculates. Roose Bolton has always understood that treason is not a matter of loyalty or hatred. It is a matter of arithmetic. One weighs the odds, one measures the wins, one commits only when the sum is certain, and the sum, for so long, had favored betrayal. A wounded king, an army bled thin, a boy who had lost the north to the Ironborn and lost his cause to a marriage broken. Tywin Lannister had whispered of Winterfell, of a wardenship, of a lordship paramount, and Roose had listened, because the numbers had agreed with the whisper. But numbers change. That is the thing men forget about arithmetic. It does not love you. It does not remain loyal to the answer it gave you yesterday. Now the ledger reads differently. Now Robb Stark holds Moat Cailin, that ancient throat of the north, and the Ironborn are dying in its ruins. Now the boy king has reunited with his host, unbroken, his banners swollen with mountain men and manderly spears. Now there are ravens flying between the wolf and the stag, and Stannis Baratheon, that grim and unbending blade, has turned his eye northward. Roose Bolton weighs all of this in the silence of his solar, and he arrives at the only conclusion the arithmetic permits. To strike now is not treason. To strike now is suicide. If he raises his knife and the north still stands, If Stannis marches to relieve it, then Tywin's promises are worth precisely nothing, for a promise of Winterfell means nothing to a man who cannot take Winterfell, and Roose cannot take it if the whole North rises against a proven traitor with a living king and a foreign ally at his back. So he does what he has always done best. He waits, he dissembles, he composes letters of loyalty in careful, colorless prose. He delays. He does not know that the delay has already betrayed him. In the Crannogs of the Neck, Howland Reed's men move like otters through water no Southron could navigate, and they have watched the Dreadfort's ravens for months. In Riverrun and on the March, Brynden Tully, called the Blackfish, has smelled the rot on Bolton from the first, for the Blackfish trusts no man who speaks so softly. And Robb Stark, who has learned in blood, learned in the memory of a life he does not remember living, that the quiet enemy is the one who kills you, has been gathering the proof. The confrontation comes at a war council, in a hall thick with the smell of smoke and wet wool, and men who have marched too long. Robb does not accuse. He simply lays the letters upon the table. Intercepted correspondence, sealed with the flayed man of House Bolton, addressed to Lord Tywin, speaking of terms and timing, and the disposition of Stark forces. He lays them down one by one, the way a man lays down cards he has known all along would win. Roose Bolton looks at the letters. His pale eyes give nothing. He begins to speak, some measured denial, some smooth deflection, and he hesitates, just for a breath, just long enough. And the hesitation is the confession. Great John Umber is on his feet before the silence finishes forming, his roar shaking the rafters. Maegi Mormont's hand finds her mace. The Glovers, the Serwyns, the Hornwoods whose bastard son had done such things. The loyal lords of the North turn as one animal turns, and there is murder in the room, real and immediate and old as the first snows. Robb raises his hand. He does not want a brawl. He wants a reckoning. And so he speaks the word, and Roose Bolton is seized, disarmed, dragged from the hall, while his careful arithmetic collapses around him, like a bridge that has borne one weight too many. Then come the tidings from the Dreadfort, and they are worse than treason. They are horror given a name, and the name is Ramsay. Word of what the bastard has done at Winterfell, of Northmen flayed and hung upon crosses, of a sport made of suffering, reaches Robb Stark in the fullness of its obscenity, and whatever restraint the king had held toward House Bolton burns away like parchment in a grate. House Bolton is attainted. The words are spoken in cold fury before the assembled lords, and no man raises voice against them. The ancient rivals of the Starks, the flayers of men, the house that in some other unwritten fate had plunged a knife into a young king's heart at a wedding feast, that house is condemned before it can ever lift the knife. Robb Stark marches on the Dreadfort. Roose Bolton, who calculated so well and so long, meets his end at the edge of a sword, his eyes still pale, still giving nothing, even as the North he sought to steal closes over him like snow over a grave. But Ramsay is not at the Dreadfort. Ramsay is elsewhere, and the wolves who ride to find him do not yet know where. Ramsay is at Winterfell. He has taken the burned husk of the great castle, the seat of kings that his father's treachery in another life had gifted him, and he has made of it a slaughterhouse. But the calculation that placed him there is a flawed one, built on assumptions that no longer hold. He believes the North fractured. He believes Robb Stark bled dry in the Riverlands, his host melting in the Southron heat. He does not know that the king has never left the north at all, that the boy who never marched to a wedding has spent his strength consolidating rather than spending it, and that a great host now moves toward him across the white plains with the inevitability of an avalanche. Consider the pieces converging. From White Harbor come the Manderley men, fat Lord Wyman's knights and men-at-arms marching under the merman's banner. Their loyalty to the Starks, a debt of gratitude older than living memory. From the coast come the fleets that will bottle the Ironborn against the shore, cutting off retreat by sea. And from the north, descending the King's Road from a wall now stabilized and held, comes the vanguard of Stannis Baratheon, hard men who have learned to fight in cold beyond imagining, lent to a northern cause because a stag and a wolf have found, for once, that their interests align. The board is set. The trap closes not in a single motion, but in a slow, deliberate tightening, and Ramsay Snow, who delights in the terror of others, is about to learn terror himself. The retaking of Winterfell is not a siege of months. It is a reckoning. The Ironborn who hold the walls are few, their appetite for a hopeless defense against a Stark king, restoring his own hall, thinner than the snow underfoot. The Bolton remnants have no cause left to fight for. Their house is attainted, their lord slain, their bastard master already scenting his own doom. When the northern host reaches the shattered gates, the resistance is brief and brutal, and then it is over. Ramsay does not stand and die as a lord ought. He flees. He rides out into the storm-swept wastes with a handful of men, and the wolves ride after him, and the chase across the frozen north is a short one. They bring him back in chains. Robb Stark does not draw out the ending. There is no cruelty in it, only justice cold and clean, a sword falling once, and the flayed man's banner burned in the yard where he had hung his victims. And then, amid the rubble of his childhood home, the king stands alone. Here he learned to ride. Here his mother watched from a window and his father spoke to him of duty. Here Bran climbed the towers and Rickon ran wild and laughing. Both are gone, believed dead, their small lives snuffed out in the wars that broke over this place. Robb Stark grieves in the blackened heart of Winterfell, and he makes a resolution in that grief. He will rebuild it. He will raise the walls anew and light the fires again, and make of this ruin the beating heart of a north restored. The dead cannot be brought back, but the house can be made to stand, and standing, it can mean something. It is into this grief that Jon comes. He rides south with Stannis' blessing, the wall now held by a new Lord Commander, his own duty there discharged in a manner few could have foreseen. And when the two brothers meet in the yard of their ruined home, there is no calculation in it, no strategy, only two men who thought never to stand together again as free men and equals. The lords who witness it understand what it means before a word of decree is spoken. The blood of Ned Stark in two vessels, standing side by side beneath the winter sky. The succession that had lived only on parchment now has a living face, and the face is a familiar one. So they gather in the godswood before the heart tree whose carved face has watched over Stark oaths for 8,000 years. The weirwood's red leaves hang heavy with snow, and Robb Stark presents his brother not as Jon Snow, the bastard, the man of the watch, but as Jon Stark, legitimized by royal decree, his named heir before gods and men. The great lords stand in the silence of that sacred place. Umber, whose loyalty is loud and fierce, Manderley, whose gratitude runs deep, Mormont, Glover, Reed, the old houses, the true houses, the ones who never bent. And one by one, before the old gods and beneath the bleeding face of the weirwood, they swear, should the king fall, they will follow Jon. The words leave their mouths in white breath and hang in the cold air, and they cannot be unspoken. It is no longer a contingency. It is a living oath, witnessed, bound, sealed in the oldest way the North knows. And as the last lord speaks his vow, Robb Stark looks upon his brother and feels, for the first time in a long while, that the future has a shape he can trust. But far to the south, in a castle by the sea, a woman in black hears news of a wedding that never happened. What if the failure of a single betrayal could unmake all the calculations of the most feared man in Westeros? What if the Red Wedding, that masterwork of treachery designed to end the war in a single bloody night, had instead become the moment the war turned against its architect? Tywin Lannister sits in his solar in the Tower of the Hand, and he does not rage. Rage is for lesser men, men who have not learned that emotion is a currency best hoarded and rarely spent. He simply reads the reports again and again. The Freys have failed. The Boltons have been broken. Rose Bolton, who was to have delivered the North in chains, is dead upon the field, and his flayed banner burns to ash in the northern cold. Balon Greyjoy's ships have retreated to their rocks, and the young wolf, whom Tywin had counted dead, whom he had wagered his gold and his patience upon being dead, lives. Worse than lives, he thrives. The old lion sets down the parchment. He understands, with the cold clarity that has made him what he is, that the board has shifted beneath him. Every piece he moved was moved upon the assumption of a Stark defeat, and now the assumption is false. Far to the north, in the great hall of Winterfell, rebuilt and secured, Robb Stark meets the woman in black, not in person, not yet, but through the words of ravens and the mouths of envoys. Stannis Baratheon, the true and rightful king by every law of succession, stubborn as stone, unbending as iron, has need of allies. And Robb Stark has need of a cause larger than the North. The terms are exchanged the way generals exchange fire. Robb will recognize Stannis' claim to the Iron Throne. Stannis, in turn, will recognize the North as a kingdom free and sovereign, its crown its own. And bound into the heart of the bargain, written into the very sinew of it, is a single clause upon which Robb Stark will not yield. Sansa, Arya, his sisters, held or lost within the walls of the Lannister capital. Stannis will lend his effort, his smugglers, his ships, his men, to seeing them freed. It is a marriage of necessity. Neither man trusts the other. Stannis finds the northern secession an affront to the very unity he wishes to rule. Robb finds Stannis cold, joyless, a man who counts his rights the way misers count coin. But necessity is the mother of every great alliance, and both understand the arithmetic. Together, they can press Tywin from two directions at once. Apart, they can be devoured piecemeal. So the pact is sealed, and Tywin Lannister, reading the intelligence of it in his solar, feels for the first time in many years the sensation of being outnumbered. Robb moves his pieces with the confidence of a man who has learned from every mistake he has made. Jon Stark now, legitimized, named, sworn to, is dispatched to command the Northern Reserve, to hold the passes and guard the homeland while the king rides south. It is a gesture of trust, and it is also strategy. An heir must be seen to command. An heir must be tested, where the risk is real, but not fatal. Robb gives his brother the North to hold, and in doing so, he gives the Northern Lords one final proof that their oaths beneath the weirwood were not spoken to empty air. Then Robb turns to the Blackfish. Together they bend over the maps of the Riverlands, the drowned green country of his mother's people, and they plan its reclamation. The Freys are broken. The crossings can be taken. The rivers can run Stark once more. And beyond the Riverlands lies the Crownlands, and beyond the Crownlands lies the city itself. And then the city gives them a gift no strategist could have engineered. At a wedding feast, draped in Lannister crimson and gold, before the assembled lords of the realm, King Joffrey Baratheon lifts a cup of wine to his lips. He drinks, and he dies. Purple-faced, clawing at his own throat, the boy king who had haunted every Stark nightmare falls choking upon the dais, and the chaos that follows spreads through King's Landing like fire through dry grass. The regime that had ruled through terror now turns upon itself. Cersei screams for justice. Tyrion is seized. Tywin, the one hand that had held all the threads together, finds himself surrounded by a court devouring its own tail. And in the confusion, agents move. Northern men, with quiet voices and southern faces, working in concert with Stannis' smugglers, who know the hidden ways of the capital, converge upon a single objective. Sansa Stark, the girl the Lannisters have used as hostage and pawn, the last card in Tywin's failing hand, becomes suddenly reachable in the disorder of a poisoned king and a shattered court. The plan is set. The paths are chosen. The night is chosen, and in a small chamber high in the Red Keep, a young woman who has learned to survive by silence hears a soft knock upon her door and does not yet know whether it brings her freedom or her death. The knock brings freedom. It comes in the form of a woman she half remembers, a face from the shadows of the court, and a whispered word that Sansa has not heard spoken aloud in what feels like a lifetime. Winterfell. The word passes between them like a key turning in a lock, and Sansa understands, in that moment, that the game she has been forced to play for so long has reached its final move. She does not weep. She has learned not to weep in front of strangers. She gathers her cloak, and she follows, down passages she has never seen, through a city consumed by its own panic, past guards, distracted by a dead king, and a court at war with itself. The chaos that Tywin Lannister could not control becomes the very cover through which his last hostage slips away. Consider the arithmetic of it. A regime built upon fear requires order to function, and when the source of that order is choking upon poison, the entire structure loosens at every joint. Doors that were watched go unwatched. Men who were loyal begin to calculate their own survival, and into the gaps left by that unraveling, the Stark cause pours like water, finding the cracks in a broken dam. Stannis' smugglers know the hidden ways. Northern agents know their purpose. And a girl who survived by making herself small and silent now moves through the heart of her enemy's power and out the other side, north, always north, toward the only home she has ever truly wanted. The journey is long. It is measured in cold nights and colder mornings, in the slow shedding of one identity after another, until at last the towers of Winterfell rise before her against a gray and snowbound sky. rebuilt now, restored from the ruin that treachery had made of it, its stones set once more upon their ancient foundations. And there, in the yard where she once played as a child, stands her brother, Robb Stark, king in the north, who had spent countless sleepless nights mourning a sister he believed lost forever to Lannister chains. He sees her. For a moment he does not move, as though he does not trust his own eyes. And then he crosses the distance between them in great strides, and he takes her in his arms, and the king in the north weeps. He weeps openly, without shame, before his men and his bannermen, because some victories are too large for a crown to contain. Jon stands nearby. Jon Snow, who is Jon Stark now by his brother's decree, heir to the north and confirmed brother-in-law as well as blood. He watches the reunion with a quiet fullness in his chest, understanding better than any man present what it means to have a family restored. And the news that follows only deepens the joy. Rumors, uncertain at first but growing firmer with each passing week, that Bran and Rickon did not die at the hands of Theon Greyjoy after all, that they fled north with loyal servants, hidden and protected, moving through the wild lands beyond the reach of any Lannister spy. The Stark line, so nearly extinguished, breathes again. The direwolves, scattered and hunted, begin at last to gather. Robb sits alone one evening in his solar and considers all that is past. The marriage that broke his alliance with the Freys, the execution of Rickard Karstark, blood spilled that cost him dearly, the near betrayal that had gathered at the twins like a storm no man could see. He had come so close to ruin. He knows this. He turns it over in his mind the way a man turns over a stone to see what lives beneath. And he understands, finally, that the single choice which saved him was the one he made in despair the night before that wedding, when he took up his pen and named Jon his heir. That decree, written in a moment of grief and calculation, had rippled outward through the world in ways he could never have foreseen. It had bound the North to itself. It had given his cause a future beyond his own person. It had made his house a thing that could not be destroyed by the death of a single king. Snow falls across the north, soft and endless, as Robb climbs the restored walls of Winterfell to stand beside his brother. Below them, the direwolf banner snaps in the wind above a kingdom made whole, independent under the treaty struck with Stannis, at peace for the first time in longer than either of them can remember. Robb speaks quietly of the strange arithmetic of it all, how a decision made in the darkest hour had proven the salvation of everything he loved. Jon listens and says little, for there is little that needs saying between them now. The North remembers, Robb tells him. The North endures, and the two brothers stand together in the falling snow, watching the light fade gently over a land that would carry the weight of its own memory into a long and quiet peace. A kingdom saved not by the sword or the crossbow, but by a single choice of succession written down long before any blood was ever spilled at the twins. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original, or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments. because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.